Hello everybody, hope you're okay. So we are now looking at week 6 of the sketchbook programme, and that is working in watercolour on watercolour paper. Now these are quite small pieces, but one thing you could do on your individual bits of watercolour paper, this is going to be ridiculously tiny, actually I'll just fold these over, is do a little frame on your page. Now if your watercolour paper is as small as mine, I perhaps would say don't bother, but I just wanted to demo it anyway. Okay, so you could do that, and then you could just do a really tiny piece in there. I would suggest what you do is, because we're supposed to be working in a series on these, is doing 3, 4, you could do more if you wanted to, same size paper, same colour throughout each series. So you could start off with maybe just 2 colours to start off with, and we're going to work with loose washes, and you can work into them later with a dry media if you want to. But to start off with, we are going to, like I say, get some colour on there, so decide which way you're going to do it. I'm going to do it this way up. I'm going to do landscape. What a surprise! But I'm going to actually do it in portrait format. Okay, I am going to try and connect the 3 together by working with water washes across here, because what I want to do, I want to do a little bit down here as well, with that coming down. I am going to actually use inks rather than watercolour. What colour have we got there? I don't want a metallic one. Where's me brown? I've tidied up all my colours and it's not a very good idea. Okay, I will go instead with concentrated watercolour. So it's these ones. You could use anything for this. You can... Oh, it's made a start for me. You could use your usual inks if you want to. You can obviously use your watercolours. If you're using watercolours, you probably want to dilute a lot from the tubes rather than try and use your pans or your half pans. You'll have to mix up an awful lot of paint. So for this early stage, you'll need to have quite a bit. So I'm going to just sort of draw along here. Hopefully I'm getting the wet patch. Obviously if I go where it's dry, then that will give it a completely different feel. So I'm going to deliberately go on the dry here, so it's not going to run until it hits the wet bit. Okay, so you can see what the difference is. And I want to introduce a little bit more water because I want it to run a little bit more, so I'm going to have to put the lid back on my spray bottle and just encourage it to run down here a little bit. It doesn't help when your water's nearly empty. Okay, so some interesting things. Oh, this is really interesting. If you get too wet, then don't worry about getting a little bit of tissue or a thirsty brush, so a brush that's damp, just to suck up that excess, because you don't necessarily want it forming a back run of some description. Just get rid of that as well. Okay, so that is just one colour so far. I've got a little bit of yellow here as well, so what I might do with this though, I might just splash it on. Okay, so I could leave it like that. I quite like the contrast between where it's wet and where it's dry. However, I would like it to flow a little bit more here, so covering that bit up, I'm just going to bring in a little bit more water. Now, if you have granulation medium, again, then decant it into a lid of some description. What is good, you know the little milk bottle lids, they're really good for decanting this into. One thing you don't want to be doing is putting dirty granulation medium back into your bottle, because obviously it's going to make it all dirty and you don't want to do that. So we'll let that do its thing. Again, you might want to suck up the excess. I do like those two colours together. So difficult to know how many techniques to use on each of these, because if I throw everything at these poor sheets, then they're going to look very interesting. But what I might do, actually, I'll just leave that there. Some really interesting things going on, which I might be able to work into later. I'm just going to leave it, let it do its thing, and sort of see what happens. Although I am going to just put a little bit. Yeah, okay. See what happens there as well. That's the thing, once I start, I just can't stop blooming fiddling. Right. I am, see it's doing its thing. I'm not going to stop. Right, okay, I'm going to lift these off and I'm going to let them dry, and then I will work into them with some dry medium when I'm able to. Look at this. Right, okay. So I've got some interesting colours on here. I'm just wondering if I can, what will happen if I pop that on there. Waste not, want not. Okay, that's interesting. Bit all one coloury at the minute, and let's get a little bit of vibrant stuff on there. A little bit of red maybe. Interesting, it's just gone brown, and I can obviously, if I want to, lift some off in places. Right, I'm going to leave that. So it's looking a bit messy and abstract at the minute, but hopefully once it's dry, then I'll be able to do something with it. Right, better clean this up then, hadn't I? That lovely colour. Oh, that's nice. Anyway, that is not not what I'm supposed to be doing right now, so just get rid of that, put that in the bin, and get my next bits of watercolour paper, and I don't know what I've done with them. Right, here we go. So I'll get 3 more out. I'm going to change my colours now. I am going to go with a blue, I think, if I can find one. And turquoise, that might be. Let me just have a look to see what this colour's like. That might be quite nice. Okay, right, so on this one, may work that way. Can't fit all 3 of them in at the moment, but never mind. So what we're going to do is, again, start off with a little bit of water. Let's try and use the clean one instead on this one. Okay, and over here, which you can't see all of that, I am going to add my black, but try not to use too much. Okay, oh, it's so exciting. I want those two to sort of be linked together a little bit, so we'll have a little bit of a crossover. Right, so at the minute I've just got black on it. I'm going to find my little sharpened to a point brush, and I'm going to bruise the paper, bringing over the lines from one shape to the other. Might actually follow these lines that are being suggested by the colour running. The colour, the paint, ink, sorry, will continue to run as long as the paper is wet. Obviously it will slow down, but you may well find there are instances where you really like your image and you can imagine what you're going to do with it, and then you come back 10 minutes later and it really has completely changed, which can be a little bit gutting. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce some colour on. Oh, that's really bright. Oh my goodness. Right, I'm just going to give it a minute. I'm just going to let it do what it wants to do. Some interesting things going on here. Get a little bit of granulation medium on there. Let's bring a little bit down here. See what happens. Sorry about the music. Faye's downstairs and she doesn't understand playing music quietly. Kids of today. Alright, so where the water is coming to the bottom, you could, if you wanted to, just lift your sheet up and try and get it to flow elsewhere, or get that little bit of tissue and soak it off. She's not singing. Oh no, actually she's got a beautiful singing voice, but she'd be mortified and I'd have to start the demo again. My baby, she's lovely. Right, okay, so if at any point you're thinking that it's looking not quite how you want it to, you could introduce a little bit more water. You could introduce a water-soluble medium. So if it's, if it's relevant, then you could... Most of the working into these will be done when it's actually dry. Okay, so don't think you have to do lots of working into it whilst it's wet. You don't have to. You could also, no reason why you can't work into it with a little bit of gesso. Gesso with wet will do some interesting things. Okay, you usually associate working in gesso on dry surfaces, but it can do some interesting things, and we all like a bit of splashing. I'm sorry, I'm obsessed with splashing everybody. Small things and all that. Right, okay, so if I have a look at these individually, that is going to create a back run. As it starts to dry, the pigment will come back down here. It might actually look interesting, but if you don't want it, then obviously you can use your tissue again. Right, so you could actually, if you didn't like the severeness of that edge, no reason why you can't soften it off with your tissue, make some interesting marks. But if you're trying to get them to flow into one another, then you do want to try, it doesn't matter if they don't, but you maybe want to think about how that's going to look. So the idea is going to be that these should work both individually and as a group together. Okay, these are all pretty outrageously overexciting at the minute, so I would hope that once they're dry I'll be able to work into them and calm them down a little bit. But this is what happens when you have to show lots of techniques on something. It can be a little bit wild. Maybe we're feeling wild today, who knows. Anyway, so that's the first part. Now I need to wait for them to dry so I can work into one or two of them. Okay? On this one, I can see actually the colours really bled under the masking tape, so it's not going to give me the crisp edge, but it might be crisp in places, which in itself might be interesting. So have a look at what you've got. You may find that you like it more one way than the other. So have a look at it and then think what you can do with it. Now this is dry now, so it should be okay for working into. You could obviously stick with the colour palette that you started off with. Now I think if I just get the excess ink off there, this is the right colour, isn't it? Yes. I should be able to get some really fine lines on here. And because it's such a tiny drawing, that does actually look quite, painting, it does actually look quite clunky, but anyway, we'll sort of get these bits pulled down a little bit. Wash my brush. You could paint in a little bit of negative space. So here's my gouache, just bringing in the white in the background. Remember, the great thing about gouache is if you're not happy with what you've done, you can just wipe it off, because you can reconstitute it. So off we go. Just get this in. I don't want to spend too long on it, because otherwise I'll end up with another 40-minute video, and we don't want that. That would never do. Right, okay, so you might want to bring in a little bit of flat colour. So here's my yellow that I worked in originally. You might just want to beef up a particular area if you don't think it's vibrant enough. Like so. You might want... Oh. I think I've been doing this for too long. You could work into it. Oh, my pen's not working. Work into it with a fine line. The thing about working on something this scale is that it really is quite small. So if you don't want it to be clunky, well, perhaps clunky is the wrong word, but if you don't want it to be too clunky, then you want to use something with quite a fine point. Now, when this is dried down here, then I'll probably work into it with a pen down there, but it's damp now and I don't want to ruin my nib, so I'm just adding a little bit of detail. And of course I could do a little bit of a... Oh, wash my brush, Joe. So whenever you're going to splash something, have a little test before you commit, okay? And if it's important that it doesn't go everywhere, then you could just use a little bit of something to mask. So you've got damage limitation. Okay, now I'm going to leave that just for now and give it another 5 minutes to dry again. And then I'll be able to add a little bit more pen work. If I can find a pen that's working. Okay, so that's that little one. So these are my red, well, it's mahogany, wasn't it? My mahogany yellow, and I added a bit of black. So as you can see, the black has lost its intensity, which is good. There's a little bit of a clunky join here, so I could maybe use a little bit of oil pastel over that and bring a line into here if I wanted to, but I'm not really all that bothered, if I'm honest with you. Some really interesting things going on here. So again, it would be a case of working on in here, maybe using a fine liner, going in with more watercolours and bringing in more details. For instance, where are my watercolours? My kids steal stuff off me all the time. It's an absolute nightmare, honestly. What colour shall we have? Purple. There's a nice red there. So, little test. No, that's not quite right. Let's go for brown instead. That's quite a warm brown. Okay. So you might, in in places, just sort of working some extra details. I'll probably try and retain these nice sort of negative space marks because they're quite nice. But then that's a little bit weird there, so we might add a little bit of watercolour into here. Because this is ink that I did the background with, like I said, it's waterproof when it's dry, so you can't soften off that edge that is there, whereas if I'd done the original in watercolour, I probably would have been able to soften it off and then continue it off the page. So I'm just going to have to try and go a little bit darker and blend it as much as I possibly can. So yeah, just think about what you can do to work into your drawing. Just sort of adding a little bit of colour just to bring that down. That's interesting. That's obviously not quite dried because it's running, but then that's giving me some interesting marks. Using the other end of my brush just to push that around, to give it a few sort of grassy marks. So hopefully what I'm developing here is a sort of layering of landscape. I quite like, I've got a black. Ooh, that's clearly not black, it's clearly brown. I quite like this light area here going into this area here. I think that actually that needs to be really dark, so I'd probably go and darken that and then put some lighter bits over the top. You could, if you've got your white pen, is it working? Then there's no reason why you can't draw into certain areas with your pens. Obviously you've got your light pen, you've got your dark pen, so you can build up some details. And yeah, just try to work on each one individually and then see how they look together. Now, I don't think these are quite finished yet, but I've worked on them a little bit more and I think I'm ready to actually stick them in my sketchbook, and then I can just sort of work on them when I fancy. Okay, just gonna, that's a little bit wet there, so I'm just dabbing it off. So how are you gonna stick them in your sketchbook? If you have a big sketchbook, so if you're working A3 or A2, I think there's a couple of A2 sketchbooks in the class, then you could just display them on one page like so. But looking at it in my sketchbook, then even if I tried to put two on a page, there's just not enough breathing space around the outside, so I would be limited here to popping them on one on a page. Okay, so just check that I've got them the right way around. That's it. So that's Faye's little painting that I'm afraid is going to get covered over, so I would give that a good good covering of glue. Try and get it fairly central. You could, just like you did, just like we looked in the last video of sort of creating a background, you could mount it or whatever, so it's not just going straight onto the paper. It's up to you how you want to do it. Okay, so let's just get these stuck in. So you can see what sort of things I've done on here. I did talk about a lot of the techniques, a little bit of splashing here. I wasn't very happy with the big bits that stuck up in the air, so I just went over them with a little bit of oil pastel. You could go over with a little bit of white acrylic or gesso. I'm actually taking a little bit of the oil pastel off, so we'll just blend it again. If you do have oil pastel on them, you'll probably want to have a page of scrap paper or greaseproof or something like that in between the two to stop the oil pastel from going on to the next page. Okay, so I'll probably leave that in there. You can actually get a special spray for oil pastel. It's the Sennelier, I'm sure it's probably called oil pastel spray. It's a fixative and it's really, really good. And if you're wanting to put something in your sketchbook and you're not wanting most of the stuff to come off, then that would be a good idea. It's quite expensive, so you know, a little bit of greaseproof would be cheaper, but if you do fancy splashing out, then maybe stick it on your Christmas list or something like that. Then that'll help and stop it smudging and blending and what have you. Okay, so there you go. There's my 3 rather bright ones. That should be on there, never mind. Rookie mistake. Right, okay, so there you go. And this is the one that I put the masking tape on. The seepage, that's a terrible word, isn't it? Leakage, I don't know. It wasn't as bad as I actually thought, so there's just a little bit there and a little bit there. Did a tiny little bit of thin splatting. There's my pen work. Okay, I think I demonstrated everything that I did on it. I think I just added tiniest little bit of negative space here just to give the illusion of light through the trees, but I was quite pleased with that in the end. Right, so you may well say, does it have to be a landscape? Absolutely not. It can be whatever you like. There is absolutely no reason why you can't work with architectural imagery. So it's like if you've got a glue stick or a palette knife or something like that, you could work in your work on your paper to create your buildings and what have you. Obviously you could draw, you don't have to just, I'm just making this up, so I'm not sure quite what it's going to look like. So this is acrylic ink, so what I would do, I'd let that dry, and then once it's dry, then I would be able to wet all the paper and I would be able to bleed in my colours and let them run. Use the same techniques but just apply it to a different subject matter. Another thing that might work quite well is still life. So if you imagine like a Morandi array of vessels, then there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't apply the same techniques to doing that sort of thing. So don't feel it has to be landscape, but you know, in the minute I am a landscape artist, so therefore it, you know, goes that, well, it doesn't follow necessarily, but there's a high chance that I will demonstrate landscapes because that is what I do. Okay, right, I shall see you at the end of the week. Have fun. Bye-bye.